We presented this initial study to all of the stakeholders, so the transit agencies and some of the county commissioners that were involved in the study. We presented it, I think, at the beginning of May. And we asked the stakeholders to look at the study results and give us comments by the end of June. In addition to that, some of the counties have asked us to come out and give them presentations, just kind of a quick overall summary of what's going on. And so we have been to Dauphin County and to Cumberland County, and so this is a chance for us to talk to you all so that you kind of understand what the study looked at, what were the results of this initial study, and then what are the next steps. So as you're aware, there was a study done that was released in, I think, September or October of 2012. And we call that the Phase 1 study. And that looked at overall what would happen if we consolidated transit systems in a 7-county area, I think. At that point, Lancaster and Berks were involved in the study. Since then, they have actually consolidated. And so they've dropped out of the study, and we've added Franklin to that initial group of counties that we were studying. So the Phase 2 study, you can see on the front of the map, included all of the counties listed in the, or that are highlighted in the front. So what this particular study looked at was governance structure. What would we be able to save if we had a single authority amongst all of those counties? And then another thing that the transit agencies came to us and said was, we would like you to look at what happens if we shared services. So we don't necessarily know if we want to consolidate, but if we shared services like legal services, HR services, and we remained our own individual transit agencies, but we shared services, what would the savings be associated with that? So the first 2 slides here just look at some of the topic areas and what the difference between the single authority, which is, it's all combined and there's one leadership team over all of the transit agencies or the transit services in that 7-county region. And then the other is the shared services. So with the shared services model, all of the existing transit agencies would remain, all of their boards would remain, but there would be the creation of another entity, a shared services entity, to manage all of the shared services that would be across all of those agencies. And the reason we looked at it like that was because we felt that you had to have a separate entity to manage that. Otherwise, if you have somebody in Lebanon who's managing HR, they may give priority to Lebanon's HR as opposed to CAT's HR. Or there may be some other entities, or some other issues related to that. So we really wanted to look at what happens if we have somebody who is non-biased, and so you can see kind of what some of the things are. And I'll just call your attention to a couple of topic areas. So the operating structure, in a single authority, you would have service districts, we call them, which would really be kind of region or localized service areas, which may initially start out as what the existing where the existing transit agencies are. But they would be managed by a single management entity. With the shared service entity, there would be a single entity over top, and they would manage all of the contracts within, or do all of the shared services for all the different transit agencies. The transit agencies would still exist. You know, you can see, like, on the labor side, agreements in a single authority would be transferred to that single authority. I mean, you know, labor agreements over the course of time, you renegotiate them. So the existing labor agreements would stay in place, and then, you know, the single entity or the single authority would renegotiate them as they come up and probably try to make them more similar across the board over time. You know, and that's a whole negotiation process that, you know, would just evolve. On a shared service entity, those agreements would be negotiated by the individual transit agencies, so they would pretty much stay the way they are now. You can just see some of the different entity or things. If you look through them, you can see kind of what the differences would be. I'll call your attention to the financial impact, because that's probably the thing that you're most interested in. In a single authority, we think that we could save approximately $2.5 million a year. On the shared services side, we think that there would be an additional cost associated with that because you would have to have employees who would work with the shared services entity, and you wouldn't be eliminating that same amount of employees. So we think there's an increase of 3 or 4 employees overall if you had a shared services entity. So you'll see that the shared services would actually cost more according to the consultants in the studies. So the background slide, we talked about this a little bit. You know, phase 2 was these counties, Berks and Lancaster dropped out because they've already consolidated and Franklin was added. The savings as a result of that would be less than what we estimated in phase 1. I think the phase 1 estimate was about $4.5 to $5 million. This phase 2 is looking at $2.5 million. So the study scope, what the study looked at was the current transit environment. We looked at operating profiles for every regional transit agency and what the things that they did. We looked at the structure of the potential governance organization, and we looked at the potential to explore integrated fares so that if you were in Lebanon, you could pay a fare and travel into Dauphin County, and you know the fares would be integrated. There'd be an integrated fare collection system, you know, which is something that the transit agencies are really trying to explore because you know people aren't necessarily just traveling within Lebanon or between New York and Harrisburg or whatever. We also looked at doing a high-level technology plan. We've estimated the administrative cost savings. Obviously, we did not look at route analysis or changing the routes. So that's not included in the study. There would be no changing in routes as a part of this. Obviously, that would be something that, you know, if there was a decision to consolidate, that would probably be something that a new management team would want to look at, but it's not included in this study. So, you know, that's kind of what we studied. So you can see on the next slide, this is just, if you looked at all of it, this would be the combined operating profile for this region. It's about 5 million trips. The total vehicles is 376, and that would really put this as probably the 3rd or 4th largest transit system in the Commonwealth. SEPTA's obviously huge. Port Authority is not as big as SEPTA, but you know, then I think the Berks-Lancaster merger puts it about the same as what this is between those two. So they probably be competing for 3rd and 4th place. Currently, there's 125 administrative employees throughout this entire region. So the next slide talks about the key assumptions of the study. There would be no change in service, as we talked about. In the single regional authority, we looked at a 3-year process to integrate fares. In a shared service entity, there would be no fare integration because the transit agencies would be operating as they were. You know, as part of the fare integration, the fare structure, there would be an attempt to make it revenue neutral so that someone in Lebanon would still be paying about the same. I mean, there's going to be, you know, they would have to go through that, but, and then the union agreements would, you know, you can see what it looks like for both of them. So the next slide shows the difference in staffing. So by having a single regional authority, we think we could save approximately 30 staff people, and obviously that's where your savings comes from, is the staffing, because we really were looking at administrative FTEs. And you can see the difference for the shared services. We think there would be an increase of about 3. And again, it's a study. There are assumptions put in place. You know, the assumptions could change, and we could change the elements of the study, but this is just kind of what's on the table. Again, the financial impact of that is about a 2.4 million savings for the single regional authority, and about an $800,000 cost associated with it, another entity. So This is just a slide that shows where the savings would be allocated. You would allocate the savings across fixed route or demand response. Some of the counties don't have fixed route. I think Perry County and local match for the fixed route jurisdictions. These are the particular entities that pay local match: Adams County, Cumberland County, Dauphin County, York County, the city of Harrisburg. And we have Act 89 has a provision: if transit agencies do consolidation, they can receive a local match waiver for the local funders equal to the savings that they achieve through consolidation. We've calculated what that savings could be over the course of 10 years for Lebanon County. So the first column, where it talks about no consolidation, because you all are not at the 15% level, every year your base local match contribution is required to increase by 5% over what you provided the year before. So the first column shows that in fiscal year 13-14, Lebanon County provided $88,000 to Lebanon Transit as a local match. And 14-15 is a 5% increase. So this column shows 5% increase over the next 10 years. If you decided to participate in consolidation and there was a local match waiver, you would receive, over the next 5 years, you could qualify for that local match waiver. So you would pay nothing in local match for the next 5 years. And then in year 6, you would go to what you paid in 14-15. So what you paid the last year. So then you're going to be achieving the 5% increased savings over the course of time. So if you look at the bottom line number, so if you had to pay that local match over that 10-year period, you'd pay about $1.4 million. If you consolidate and achieve the local match waiver, you would pay $691,000. So you would achieve a savings of about $700,000 over that 10 years. So that's basically the way we would calculate local match. But they would achieve savings, and they'd have to be real savings. Otherwise, they wouldn't qualify for the local match, or they'd have to cut service if they didn't have your local match piece of their budget. Their budget's based on whatever it is, and if they achieve real savings, then they would be able to do that. And that local match savings, or any savings, so what we found with Red Rose and Barta is that they've actually achieved more savings than what is their local match. So they can do whatever they want with that savings. They can increase service. They can put it in the bank for when they might need it if there's a financial downturn in the future. Do whatever they want. It's their savings. We're not taking it back. Our contribution will continue to increase and be at the same level that it was before. So the state doesn't actually see the savings. The counties that don't contribute, they could get some additional service potentially, and we've estimated transition costs, which Penn DOT would cover at about $4 million for a single regional entity. And you can see that, if you save $2.5 million, it would only be about a 2-year payback for us to achieve savings. Not us, Penn DOT, but for the region to see the payback on the investment that it would take to do a transition. And obviously, if there was shared services with an increased cost, we probably would never see a payback. The next steps is really for the entities that are involved to have a discussion locally to decide, is this something we want to do? And are there things that would make this a non-starter for us? Like, people need to identify what those issues are and kind of know them in their head, probably lay them on the table ahead of time so that people know what's important to you. We believe that, if there's a critical mass, or if there's, several agencies that want to consolidate, that then we would have to have some additional discussions. What what Red Rose and Barta had done is that they had a joint board that worked together to identify and moved through all of those issues. And they had equal representation from Red Rose and Barta, and so we look at that as probably a good model in terms of having, one person from each county or each transit agency be involved in the discussions and kind of move forward. And then obviously you could, if you get through that process, then we would start working towards consolidation. We will issue a final report that will be public